As a public hockey scout, it's all well and good putting out content as I do, making takes and breaking down and analyzing players' games. But what happens when I'm on the clock, when I have to draft players? On today's episode, we're breaking down the players that I would have selected on the clock in the 2025 NHL draft class.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're doing a very fun thing, and we're actually focusing on this little exercise that I do every single year at the draft to see which players I would have selected on draft day using the Montreal Canadiens picks. I'm from Montreal. I grew up a Habs fan, so those are the selections that I've just been using and guessing where I would personally select players. So on today's episode, we're only going to be looking at the players I would have selected in the 2025 NHL draft. But next month, you can look out for a video where I break down the entirety of my past 5 years of drafting on the clock with the time crunch and the team that I have built with those selections. It's not the most cohesive team because as a scout, I draft for value, not for team cohesiveness. That's a GM's job, not a scout's. So there's a little bit of kind of strategizing for position. I did a bit more of that, I think, this year than usual, especially also in terms of getting bigger guys in because I have a lot of talented small boys, which should surprise nobody who has listened to this podcast for a long time. But that's the outlook for today's episode. We'll be looking at the players I would have selected with the first round picks that the Montreal Canadiens ended up trading in the Noah Dobson deal, as well as every single pick that they actually ended up making on day 2 of the draft. But before we dive into everything, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So let's talk a little bit about the players I would have been selecting for the Montreal Canadiens. And for this, I'm going to also share my screen. So that should pop up here. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see it on your screen. If you're listening on a podcast, I'm still going to be saying all of these players' names. And all you're going to be missing out on is kind of the full list of guys that I would have picked of my draft picks, as well as the picks the Montreal Canadiens ended up actually making. And I'll probably be checking out a couple elite prospect pages along the way as well for a little bit more of a visual cue in today's show. So as you can see on the screen here, at 34th overall, well, actually, before we dive into 34th overall, I wanted to say who I would have picked with the first round picks that they didn't actually hold on to, so I don't get to keep them on the team that I call Team High. And with those picks, so 16 and 17, there were 3 players I was really eyeing. First and foremost, Victor Eklund, who ended up going there at 16th overall to the New York Islanders. Logan Hensler, the big mobile right shot defenseman who fell all the way to 23 to the Ottawa Senators. And a very fun player by the name of Justin Carbonneau, the homegrown talent here, the high skill player, the right shot winger. On stream, I ended up saying that I would have selected one of these players. And much as it hurt my soul for the Montreal Canadiens and their needs, I actually passed on Victor Eklund, something that I honestly surprised myself with, because instead I went with Carbonneau and then the right shot defense need with Logan Hensler. And that was obviously also in the fantasy world where the Noah Dobson trade never happened and the Habs still had holes at right deep. So that's kind of what my thinking would have been in those slots if the Dobson deal had not occurred. If it did occur and you're using still the idea of the Montreal Canadiens with Noah Dobson and the idea of that draft pick that obviously got dealt away in favor of him, then yeah, go for both wingers with Victor Eklund as well. But let's actually fall into the picks that I would have made here. And we're kicking it off here in the first segment just with the first two names, because these are the high upside bets I got in this draft class at 34th and 69th overall. For context, the Canadiens traded picks 41 and 49 to the Carolina Hurricanes to trade up to 34th overall, selecting Alexander Zhuravsky, the skilled, elite handling Russian winger. And instead, with that selection, I went out and got Blake Fiddler, a very big right shot defenseman, 6'4", over 200 pounds, skates like the wind, hits like a truck, really, really good in terms of transition defending and angling rushers towards the boards, really suffocating gap control as well. He's a player that I've really liked throughout the season, and the only idea I have in terms of him falling on draft day is that he interviewed poorly, because in terms of the on-ice qualities and the hockey lineage, being the son of Vernon Fiddler, I didn't really see any reasons for him to be dropping, and he dropped way far to 36th overall to the Seattle Kraken eventually. So he's a player I was very happy to add into my lineup. And also, just for context, if I scroll up, you can see that I had very little right shot defense depth with Aaron Manishin, Henry Muse, Matthew Mania, Cameron Allen, Jake Martin, who never got drafted a couple years ago there. So getting a player of Blake Fiddler's caliber on my right side, very, very appealing for me. So I went out and got that big boy with my first pick, but it was with the next pick where I was almost shocked that he was still available. And shockingly, he was still available for two more times that I stepped up to the plate to select the player. So Cameron Schmidt was my pick at 69th overall. I love the player the Habs picked. I think Hayden Papanicus is a perfect fit in the Montreal Canadiens system. He's a player that brings size at 6'5", 200 plus pounds, skates well, good hands, very good details, especially on the defensive side of things. He's physically engaged, great fit as a bottom six future guy down the middle for the Habs. But for me, it had to be Cameron Schmidt in terms of that elite upside, the elite mobility, the elite goal scoring, the elite handling, the borderline elite playmaking. There's so much to kind of sink your teeth into with Cameron Schmidt's game. I've heard some whispers that weren't very good in terms of like character stuff, especially with like the family. So there's definitely some questions there that may have also played a role in him falling a little bit on draft day. But overall, I still think with Cameron Schmidt, you get such elite potential that he was a very easy selection for me there at 69th overall, even though I have a team filled to the brim of small wingers, some of which who have not panned out amazingly. I mean, if we look at my winger chart here, that isn't formatted because of how my screen is kind of shared right now. But guys like Michkov, Demidov, awesome, obviously. But Jaden Perron's in there, Sean Farrell, Jagger Firkus is a work in progress. Logan Stankoven's awesome, obviously. But yeah, I kind of figured I had a lot of them already, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to select Cameron Schmidt in the third round. So that is what I did with that selection. So I thought with my first two picks that I got good value in terms of I had no first round selections this year that I could actually keep. And still I was able to get two players I had ranked between 20th and 25th overall, actually 20th and 25th overall respectively for these two guys. And to get those at 34 and 69, I'm very happy with. This year, my rankings actually ended up mirroring NHL teams a lot more than previous years. I'm starting to rank a little bit more in line with consensus, I would say, in terms of in past years, I would have really small, long shot guys ranked way higher than I do nowadays. Not saying guys like Lane Hudson, who I just saw as completely elite and deserving of an 11th overall ranking, but more guys like Gavin Thoresen or even Jaden Perron, these smaller players that have just been struggling a little bit more at that next step, at the higher pace with more physicality. So I thought that honestly, with this year's draft, I was a little bit more maybe tuned in with what NHL teams are doing with my own rankings as well. So I only had two guys out of my first round still available after like 40th or 45th overall, and those were William Moore and Cameron Schmidt. So a lot of the guys I valued were gone very early in this draft. So that was a little bit different from past years. I found where like last year, for instance, or 2 years ago, I would say like Jaden Perron was like a top 15 guy for me. Aaron Manishin was a first rounder. Alex Ciernik was a first rounder. I had a lot of these guys ranked high who fell, and interestingly, the exact guys in my first round who have been developing the poorest. So definitely some lessons learned there, but still, I think that this year with those first 2 picks, I was able to get really good value. And I also think the Habs got excellent value here. So I don't think that either my team or the Habs team is like lacking in quality here in terms of those first 2 selections. I think that with the Habs, you get a little bit more offensive punch with that first pick than I do, but much more projectable probably with Fiddler than Jarofsky. But then the second pick is kind of the inverse of that, right? Where Hayden Panicus is the high likelihood NHL or bottom 6 projectable talent, and Cameron Schmidt is your swing for the fences top 6 guy. So I felt that with these picks, I was able to kind of get a balance of projectability, but also significant upside, and that the Canadiens did something similar. So I think that that's so far so good here. But these are always kind of exercises that look better the day of than they do years onwards, as I think these previous iterations can show on a year-to-year basis, which I will break down in another podcast down the line, introducing the entire team I have and just doing a deep dive into the process and kind of the evolution of this process over the years. But that wraps up the first segment. In the next one, we're going to keep going with the next 3 picks off my board between 81st overall and 113th. Got some fun players to talk about there. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm at a desk, on a road trip, or just need that quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell variety are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All righty, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, continuing here with my the players I would have selected with the Montreal Canadiens picks. So at 81st overall, my pick would have been Kristian Epperson, a high-intensity winger from the Saginaw Spirit in the OHL. Let's head over to his Elite Prospects page here. He's committed to playing with the University of Denver, which is a fantastic program, which is always something nice to see. 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, and he's an overager. He was playing with the NTDP last year and was very much a bottom 6 capacity guy, didn't really shine so much, and then moved over to Saginaw and went from being a third of a point a game to almost like closer to 2 points a game than 1, with 27 goals and 80 points in 58 games this campaign, working wonders with Michael Misa. I'm told that perhaps one of the reasons that he fell to 88th overall to the Los Angeles Kings relative to like the 40 range that I have him ranked is perhaps also with like interview quality. There were some questions around character, I believe, also with that player, but these are also not things that I really have insight on as someone who's more on the outside looking in with those elements compared to NHL scouts, of course. But he's a player that I've liked a lot in my viewings. He's very intense. He's middle driven. Like, let's go back over and read some of the scouting reports here from the team. And Lauren Kelly logged so many on this player. Writing a well-rounded, impactful, dynamic game from Epperson overall, who looks like a first-round challenger. And this is from March. This is a relatively recent viewing, and for a player who dropped all the way to like the mid to late 3rd round, to get him in the mid 3rd, I was very happy. I thought that was good value in terms of what was left available at that point. I found, as I was mentioning in the first segment, that the players I was valuing were going quick and weren't really dropping like I've been more used to in past years, because I think that what I value has also been shaped a little bit here by the previous seasons, by the previous drafts, by the previous playoffs. And interesting to kind of see how this is going to look compared to the rest of my draft classes, because I think that there's a bit of a different kind of ideology going into this year as well. I think that I've grown and learned a lot as a scout in the past year, having joined Elite Prospects and just continuing here with the podcast as well. But the Montreal Canadiens instead selected Bryce Pigford, an offensive defenseman, but also an overager. So we both went with overagers here. And then the next in this back-to-back picks here, we both went with goaltenders. So there's definitely kind of a common thought between these selections on my side and the Canadiens. Bryce Pigford, scored like 20 goals in 47 WHL games this season with the Medicine Hat Tigers, a dominant team, of course, with Gavin McKenna and Caden Lindstrom at the very, very tail end of the season. But it's just a lot of talent through and through. Yeah, 20 goals and 47 points in 48 games as a high activity, activating defenseman who is an all-around guy with goal-scoring capabilities. He proactively fills gaps in the defensive zone, many of which he creates with give and goes, using the weak side, middle, and lateral space. He's constantly open for one-timers and especially walk-in wristers. When a pass comes near, he gets in motion, catches it straight onto his shooting pocket, conceals his release, and snipes. This is a high-end shooter of the puck. And even though, yes, he's a D+1, and yeah, he's average size at 6'1", 183 pounds, and his skating, I would say, is maybe subpar, if not average. The special offensive tool is something to build around. I mean, massive growth this season compared to previous years with the Seattle Thunderbirds. I think is a very interesting project to take on for the Habs. At this stage, am I happier with Epperson over Pickford? Yes. Am I confident, like super confident that's going to remain the case in 2 years' time? Not necessarily. So I think the Habs did well here as well. So, and the next pick, the two goaltenders, I haven't yet to watch Arseny Radkov play hockey. So I can't really speak too much to him, but I have read some on this player who the Montreal Canadiens selected. But I went with Petteri Rimponen, the player who was dominant for Finland at the World Juniors this year, who I thought deserved to get drafted last year as well. He's another re-entry. The Habs instead went with a very young goaltender who's like an August birthday or July birthday and still 17 years old here at the time of publishing. But with Rimponen, you have an undersized netminder. With Radkov, you have a 6'4" big guy. But I think with Rimponen, you have a lot more advancement in terms of the reads and in terms of the mechanics. This is a very controlled and composed goaltender. And I think that he's a guy that could really defy the odds as an undersized netminder. And I didn't think that there was much more value in net beyond Rimponen at this stage of the draft. So I just struck. I had very few goaltenders going into this, 2 to be exact. Who were my goaltenders? My goaltenders they're lost in the fray here, seemingly. Oh, yeah, Ryerson Leanders and Kirill Gerasimyuk. Am I confident in that pair being long-term for me in a team? Not necessarily. Do I have a third undersized goaltender? Yup, with Petteri Rimponen. Instead, the Habs went with a guy who's a lot more raw, but also potentially a bit more fills the frame of your typical NHL netminder. He has some issues, especially in terms of his glove and catching. NHL opponents were beating him up high quite a bit this season, but I think it's an interesting project to take on here for the Montreal Canadiens. But the next pick is extraordinarily fun because at 113th overall, the Habs and I saw eye to eye. We both wanted L.J. Mooney in the slot, and we both had the exact same rationale. There is nobody left available that has this upside, this skill, this dynamism. That's what the Habs said in their presser after the draft, and that's what I said at the time in my live stream when I made the selection, and then immediately celebrated when I saw that the Habs made the same conclusion. But L.J. Mooney at 5'6", 5'7", is one of the smallest players in this year's draft class. He still has to add a lot more weight, but what he brings is dynamic skating, dynamic handling, a lot of creativity of ideas, intense pace, high-end motor, a lot of middle drive. And on top of that, I think this is a guy that just is going to that dog in him all the way to the NHL. He works that hard. I think he's a really impressive player with his engagement. And the Montreal Canadiens were saying the same thing of, yeah, he's small, but if we thought that physicality was going to be a problem for this player, we wouldn't have selected him. I had a similar thought process of at that stage in the draft, there just wasn't anyone that brought this combination of upside and offensive punch like LJ Mooney did. So he felt like the very intuitive decision in that slot, and the Habs felt the same. So very happy that we both ended up with this player, a player I've loved watching all year long and is imperfect and still has to learn to kind of pick his spots in terms of playmaking moments rather than just like shooting everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. There's definitely still some of that decision making that has to mature in his game, but with his like really unique combination of tools, I think he can defy the odds. I think he can make it in the NHL and become kind of the heir to Brendan Gallagher's throne in a couple years' time. I think that'd be a whole bunch of fun. And LJ Mooney is going to be a really, really, really fun player, I think, next season in college hockey. well, we'll see if it's next season or the year after, but it's going to be next season, if you ask me, with the University of Minnesota. This is a fantastic program to go to. Players always develop here well. If you want to know guys like Matthew Nyes, they played here. So lots of talent here with the University of Minnesota. I mean, next year you have his NTDP teammate Maceo Phillips going there, Jacob Rombach, Finn McLaughlin, Beckett Hendrickson, Brody Zemer, and you still have guys from this year's roster as well. So a lot of talent there in that roster. I think this is a team that's going to also be able to build some offense around a player like L.J. Mooney, of course, because you have a lot of graduations at forward in that core. Guys like Jimmy Snuggerud and Matthew Wood have signed their ELCs, and even on defense, right? You had players like Oliver Moore and Sam Renzel as well. So a lot of players that kind of exited the program here this season. They're looking for that next wave of offensive punch. It's the perfect time for L.J. Mooney to kind of take on that role as a leading offensive and creative figure with the University of Minnesota. I think he's a fantastic get for the Montreal Canadiens. But that wraps up this segment of the episode. In the final one, we're going to wrap things up by looking at the final 4 selections for both me and the Montreal Canadiens. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. All righty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, breaking down the games of the 4 players that I selected and the 4 players that the Montreal Canadiens selected. And unlike the L.J. Mooney pick, there is no more crossover here. We have 4 distinct players on each side. At 145, I stepped up and I wanted Harry Nansi, a player who was eventually selected, I believe, like around 154 by the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this is a very interesting player. He's 6'3". He's one of the youngest players in the draft class, just 5 days off of being eligible for the 2026 NHL entry draft as a September 10th birthday. 185 pounds, still has room to fill out his frame, but he's very physically competent. This is a guy who's really, really solid in terms of his physical engagement along the wall. This is a very, very active player. So let me show this to you on screen real quick. We've got the draft guide over at Elite Prospects. And with Harry Nansi, you get some real slick handling ability. He's a good playmaker who pushes the pace of play and blends physicality with high-end handling flashes. He's extremely raw, but he's an exciting project. And as a big right shot center with runway, yeah, the production wasn't really there this season with 23 points in 67 games, but still, there's a lot of upside with this player. He's so young. I think that was a worthwhile bet there at 145. And instead, the Habs went out and selected a Quebecois netminder, Alexis Cournoyer, with their selection, a player who came out of kind of nowhere last season from playing in the MJAHL to switching over to the QMJHL with the Cape Breton Eagles and just coming into the league for the first time in his career at the major junior level and putting up a .942 save percentage in 21 regular season games. Folks, those numbers are outrageous. And in the playoffs, only played 2 games, looked a bit uglier with an .863 save percentage, but hey, 2-game sample, you really can't take that too seriously. So that was the Montreal Canadiens selection there at 145, but at 177, I selected a player who actually ended up going undrafted, one of 2 in my draft haul this year, which happens every year, but I've also had quite a few players who end up getting drafted after I actually selected them. Guys like Riker Evans of the Seattle Kraken was a 7th-round draft pick for me in his draft-eligible campaign before he went in the 2nd round in his D+1 season. And a couple moments of that same thing, I believe, Alexis Gendron, and he went actually a year later in the 2023 draft. So I went with Bruno Osmanis here, who's been developing in Sweden. He's a Latvian winger, a very intense player who we think has very projectable elements in his game. He's 5'11", 170 as a right shot winger, but he has decent handling ability and a playmaking ability that really separates him from his peers. He's also an intelligent attacker who, in transition, is able to flash dynamic creation abilities, also excels at sniffing out offensive opportunities away from the puck and exploiting gaps in defensive coverage. He handles the puck comfortably at higher speeds and helps retrieve pucks in the offensive zone while also reading defenders' intentions and intercepting their passes on the forecheck. He's perceptive, he's intense, he's skilled. I love a lot of elements with this player, but he didn't get selected, even though he put up 37 points in 31 games at the J20 level and scored a goal and 7 points in 27 Hockey Allsvenskan games with IF Björklöven, a player that was, I think, really proving himself throughout the season, but didn't end up getting his pick on draft day, which is unfortunate. But the Habs selected Carlos Handel, a German right shot defenseman who moves the puck very well, average size at 6'1", 176, but with above average skating and a really good offensive gap and understanding of when to exploit space and activate from the blue line. I think there's upside here in terms of the offensive ceiling. He only scored 3 goals and 26 points this season in 52 games, so half a point a game there this campaign. But at the U18 Worlds was really just driving the bus there for Team Germany as their captain, scoring 2 goals and 4 points in 4 games. I think he's a player that has some real runway, and our QMJHL scout, Heidi Kalakash, who was, of course, also previously the co-host here on the podcast, really likes the selection. So love that for the Habs. And at 189, I selected another faller who ended up going at 221 to the Carolina Hurricanes, Filip Ekberg, the 10-goal scorer from the U18 Worlds, who just wasn't really getting his opportunities in the OHL with the Ottawa 67s. He's a cerebral playmaker who works quite hard. He surveys the play, anticipating its flow and timing himself with it. Ekberg always seems to find cross-ice passing lanes in the offensive zone, always holding the puck in his hip pocket in a position that enables him to hit multiple different plays instantly. Ekberg deceives defenders and sends passes through them. He knows his play before the puck touches his stick, spots advanced maneuvers, and executes them instantly. Sturdy inside contact and never afraid to cut inside. He has puck protection skills too. I like a lot of elements in Ekberg's game, and even with really, really iffy deployment this season, he still was able to score 16 goals and 45 points in 53 games with the Ottawa 67s. I thought he was a very clear top 3-round candidate, and ended up slipping all the way down into my lap at 189, so I was very happy to pick him up. The Habs selected a defensive defenseman, very young for the draft class, Andrew McNeil, from the Kitchener Rangers, 6'3", 196 pounds as a right shot blue liner, a July 25th, 07 birthday. He scored 3 assists in 33 games this campaign. He's a player that I haven't really watched much, but everything I've heard is just that he's a defensive specialist, can move decently well for his size, and is just a play killer at heart. So that's who the Habs were going for. Kind of just wanted to fill some defense depth here late in the draft. And I ended up following suit with my final selection. I was really considering these names that you see at the bottom here. Guys like Philippe Veilleux, Dakota Rea-Mullen, and Topias Hynninen. 3 players that went undrafted, surprisingly to me. And Topias Hynninen being a re-entry, he scored almost a point a game in Liga this season as a 19-year-old first-line center, replacing Konsta Helenius with Jukurit. Then Dakota Rea-Mullen, a highly mobile right-shot defenseman, playing college hockey this year with the University of Michigan. And Philippe Veilleux, the dynamic goal-scoring offensive phenom with the Val d'Or in the QMJHL, kind of this year's Justin Poirier, if you're keeping track of last year's draft, kind of the similar kind of feel in terms of offensive upside, and also the issues that he still needs to kind of get over on that path. But I opted for a big boy because I had a lot of undersized players in this draft, whether it be Cameron Schmidt, even Kristian Epperson isn't the biggest, but Terry Rippinen's an undersized goalie. L.J. Mooney is tiny. Osmanis and Ekberg are both a little bit undersized. So I just went with size here with Daniil Skvortsov from the Guelph Storm in the OHL. He's a big 6'4", 214-pound left shot defenseman who skates well. He's toolsy. He's at his best when he plays a punishing brand of defense, closing in aggressively on his opponents as they try to turn the corner and enveloping them along the wall. With his combination of size, reach, and mobility, the defenseman is hard to bypass. Players have to use deception to get through his space, and even then, all Skvortsov needs to do to catch up are a couple of strides and extension of his stick. That defensive range is really exciting. He scored 5 goals and 18 points this season in 59 games, but I think that could really grow next campaign, and I think he's a really fascinating prospect in this year's draft who deserve to get picked, especially in a class filled with so many massive players who got selected above where they were projected to go. But the final pick that the Montreal Canadiens made was Maxim Vig from the USHL. He's a commit to play at Bemidji State University in college hockey, and he's also a defensive defenseman, a D+1, but 6'2", 212 pounds. He's heavy, he's big, he's difficult to get around, and he was an assistant captain this year in the USHL with the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders, scoring 10 goals and 32 points in 62 games, but adding 85 penalty minutes. This is a physical, punishing guy, and I'm curious to see how he develops at the college ranks. But that wraps things up here for today's episode. I would love to hear your thoughts on the format of this and kind of getting a visual to keep an eye on. And also what your thoughts are on my draft haul. Who would you have picked with picks in these ranges? Who did I maybe miss on that I could have had with these selections? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always greatly appreciated. And keep your ears and eyes open for more content coming from us here in the coming days and weeks. We're going to have loads of scouting reports and overall breakdowns of the draft. So keep your eyes open. But that's everything from us today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I'll catch you listening again very, very soon.